On Christmas Day of 1941, just weeks after the Japanese strike on Pearl Harbor, a detachment from Marine Aircraft Group 21 arrived on Midway from Marine Corps Air Station Iwo in Hawaii, flying off of the USS Saratoga. Its squadrons, Marine Scout Bomber Squadron 231 and Marine Fighting Squadron 221, were originally part of Navy Task Force 14, ordered to relieve Wake Island, which was under assault by the Japanese since December 8th. However, on December 22nd, the action was aborted and the squadrons were redirected to reinforce Midway Atoll, the anticipated next target of the Imperial Japanese Navy. At this point in time, Midway's aerial defensive force was composed of only 14 Brewster F-2A Buffaloes and 17 Vought SB-2U Vindicators. The 6th Defense Battalion, the ground element of Marines stationed on Midway, received a complement of 3, 5, and 7-inch Seacoast batteries for island defense, anti-aircraft machine guns, and approximately 100 additional Marines. In early January 1942, the MAG-21 executive officer, Lieutenant Colonel William Wallace, arrived at Midway Atoll to take command of the detachment. Over the next 2 months, he oversaw the detachment as it continued to grow with continued reinforcements and saw the atoll's defenses tested for the first time. On January 25th, a Japanese submarine surfaced abruptly and opened fire on Sand Island, apparently trying to knock out the radio station. Battery D opened up with its 3-inch guns and forced the enemy craft to crash dive 3 minutes after it had surfaced. On March 1st, the detachment was formally reorganized as Marine Aircraft Group 22, and its 2 squadrons were divided into Marine Fighting Squadrons 221, 222, and Marine Scout Bomber Squadrons 241 and 242. Only 9 days after the birth of MAG-22, the group experienced its first test of aerial combat when a 4-plane section from VMF 221, piloted by Captain James Neefus, Lieutenants Francis McCarthy and Charles Summers Jr., and Marine gunner Robert Dickey, engaged the Japanese Kawanishi H-6K 45 miles from Midway Atoll. Captain Neefus made the first pass, drew smoke for one engine, and the target dove for a cloud bank of 3,000 feet. Lieutenants McCarthy and Summers made modified overhead passes, one each, before the patrol bomber reached the cloud bank. Marine gunner Dickey made a tail approach and received a wound in his left shoulder and 7 bullet holes in his plane. Captain Neefus was able to return and make a second pass. Dropping below the clouds, scattered, burning debris was observed on the surface of the water. Upon their return, Lieutenant Colonel Wallace and his staff presented a bottle of bourbon to the pilots for their efforts. They were later formally awarded by Admiral Chester Nimitz during his visit to the atoll in early May. In the following month, the MAG experienced further restructuring as VMF 222 and VMSB 242 were transferred off of the island on April 12th, and then Major Ira Keeves assumed command on April 19th. Additional reinforcements were provided in the form of 5 more anti-aircraft batteries, 2 rifle companies of the 2nd Marine Raider Battalion, 5 light tanks, 16 Douglas Dauntless bombers, and 7 Grumman Wildcat fighters. During this time, the Japanese Navy was making its own preparations for its assault on Midway, and the Japanese combined fleet was conducting carrier operational training and rehearsals. The enemy plan called for 3 days of naval and aerial attack and pre-landing softening by a powerful carrier task force which included well over 100 naval aircraft, followed by a heavily escorted occupation force carrying approximately 2,500 ground troops which would conduct landings and capture the 2 islands. For comparison, the sum of Marine forces making every preparation possible in anticipation of the coming attack on Midway was 59 aircraft and a few hundred ground personnel. At 0545 on June 4th, PBY Catalina flying boats sent out from Midway made what Admiral Nimitz declared the most important contact of the battle and sighted planes of the Japanese attack force 150 miles out from Midway. 10 minutes later, visual contact was made with 2 enemy carriers and a sizable portion of the main attack force 180 miles out, bearing 320 degrees. 3 minutes later, the 6th Defense Battalion logged a radar report, many planes, 89 miles, 320 degrees. Pilots of both squadrons immediately rushed to their planes and took off to intercept their respective targets, while ground forces manned every single weapon and warning device on the island. VMF 221, constituting a 25 aircraft mix of Brewster Buffaloes and a few Grumman Wildcats, in 2 sections led by Major Floyd Parks and Captain Kirk Armistead, flew to intercept the incoming Japanese Midway attack force of 108 aircraft. At this point, it is critical to acknowledge the Buffaloes were largely obsolete by this time. Compared to the Japanese Zero, they were unstable, overweight, and were derided by their pilots as flying coffins. Of note are the drastic differences in weight, maximum speeds, and rate of climb. The Marines' Buffaloes were heavier, slower, and climbed far slower than the Japanese Zeros, resulting in a massive performance gap. The pilots under Major Parks decided the Zero escorted valve dive bombers at 0616 about 30 miles out from Midway, and Captain John Carey, leading one of Parks' divisions in a Wildcat, launched the attack from 17,000 feet. The Marines were hopelessly outnumbered, and they found that the Zero fighters could fly rings around them. They had time for only one pass at the bombers before being swarmed by Zeros, for 1 to 5 of which got on the tail of each Marine fighter. Meanwhile, the other section of 13 Midway fighters under Captain Kirk Armistead came in for an attack against the enemy air formation. This section found greater success than the first, however still experienced heavy losses. Overall, 32 enemy aircraft were shot down in the 15-minute engagement. However, of the 25 Marines that went into battle, only 10 would return, and only 2 of the aircraft would remain operational. The first Japanese formation then attacked Midway Atoll at about 0630 or 14,000 feet. Anti-aircraft fire knocked down 2 of the horizontal bombers before they could unload, but 22 were able to drop their bombs. As these initial explosions rocked the 2 islands, 18 planes of the enemy's second wave came over for their strike. This first wave dropped 9 242-kilogram bombs on the seaplane hangars, setting them aflame and starting a large fire in the fuel oil tanks 500 yards to the north. Other targets were the already flaming fuel storage at the north end of Sand Island, the Sand Island Dispensary, and the eastern island powerhouse, which had suffered direct hits from 2 805-kilogram bombs. At the very end of the strike, the 6th Defense Battalion Eastern Island Command Post received a direct hit which killed the sector commander, Major William Benson, and wounded several other men. After these bombers completed their runs, the Zeros came in for strafing attacks. This one and only airstrike on Midway was over shortly after 0700. Meanwhile, VMSB 241 also split into 2 sections led by Major Benjamin Norris and Major Lofton Henderson, flying the Vought Vindicator and Douglas Dauntless, flew to attack the approaching Japanese naval striking force. Henderson's group climbed to 9,000 feet, sighting the Japanese ships at 0744. But as the SBDs spiraled down, they were set upon by swarms of Nakajima carrier attack bombers and Zeros flying air cover, which were soon reinforced by more fighters from the carriers below. Henderson and several others were shot down in their attack on the Japanese carrier Akagi. Major Norris's section also came under attack by the Zeros. His pilots turned to the nearest target at hand and crowded their planes into a standard glide run, almost on top of the Japanese battleship Haruna. Some of the pilots also went after the Kirishima. 3 Marines were shot down, and the group was credited with splashing 2 enemy fighters plus 2 probables. Through 241's efforts, the squadron was able to damage the Akagi at the loss of 16 aircraft and crew, including those of the 2 majors leading the attack. The following day, the squadron launched a second attack on several damaged Japanese cruisers, once again as 2 sections, now led by Captain Marshall Tyler and Captain Richard Fleming. They located the ships at about 0800, and Tyler led his division out of the sun towards the stern of the Mogami, while Fleming and the other Vindicator pilots went down at the Mikuma. Both divisions were met with heavy anti-aircraft fire. Captain Tyler's attack bracketed the Mogami with 6 near misses, causing topside damage to the ship. As Captain Fleming led a coordinated glide bombing and dive bombing assault against the Mikuma, his aircraft was struck and set aflame by anti-aircraft fire. Despite the severe damage inflicted on his aircraft, he maintained his course at an altitude of 500 feet, released his bomb to achieve a near miss on the stern of the target before crashing into the sea in flames. For his actions, he was posthumously awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. Fleming's rear gunner and radio man, Private First Class George A. Toms, was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. Outnumbered overall 2-1 in inferior aircraft with far less training than their enemy, the Marines successfully defended Midway. MAG-22 aircraft downed 43 of the 108 enemy aircraft, 25 Valdive bombers, and 18 Zeros. The group also damaged 3 Japanese ships. All of this success in combat came at a great cost, one rarely surpassed in the history of U.S. naval aviation. Of the 52 aircraft that intercepted Japanese forces, only 20 returned. Including the Marines and the MAG's ground echelon, casualties totaled 7 killed in action, 35 missing in action presumed dead, and 25 wounded in action. Over 50 Marines were awarded for their valor, skill, and leadership in defending the island. Lieutenant Colonel Keames was awarded the Navy Distinguished Service Medal for his leadership of the MAG in the pivotal battle, and the MAG was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation. For conspicuous courage and heroism in combat at Midway Island during June 1942, outnumbered 5-1, Marine Aircraft Group 22 boldly intercepted a heavily escorted enemy bombing force, disrupting their attack and preventing serious damage to island installations. Operating with half of their dive bombers obsolete and in poor mechanical condition, which necessitated vulnerable glide bombing tactics, they succeeded in inflicting heavy damage on Japanese surface units of a large enemy task force. The skill and gallant perseverance of flight and ground personnel of Marine Aircraft Group 22 fighting under tremendously adverse and dangerous conditions were essential factors in the unyielding defense of Midway. Shortly after the end of the battle, Admiral Nimitz perfectly summarized the significance of the Marine defenders in the following dispatch to the MAG. Please accept my sympathy for the losses sustained by your gallant aviation personnel based at Midway. Their sacrifice was not in vain. When the great emergency came, they were ready. They met unflinchingly the attack of vastly superior numbers and made the attack ineffective. They struck the first blow at the enemy carriers. They were the spearhead of our great victory. They have written a new and shining page in the annals of the Marine Corps. Following the Battle of Midway, all of MAG-22 squadrons were in a severely weakened state. The majority of the group's aircraft were either destroyed or non-airworthy, and a significant number of pilots were killed in action. For the remainder of 1942 and all of 1943, the squadrons conducted routine patrol missions in the area as they rebuilt their strength, receiving new pilots and aircraft. At the start of 1944, the original 2 squadrons were transferred to other air groups, and MAG-22 was slated for combat operations, receiving VMF-113, VMF-422, and VMFN-533, equipped with the newer and far more capable Vought Corsair and Grumman Hellcat. The MAG was transferred to the 4th Marine Base Defense Air Wing, which would later become the 4th Marine Air Wing. In the beginning of 1944, U.S. forces commenced the Marshall Islands Campaign, first invading the islands of Majuro and Kwajalein, then invading Eniwetok Atoll, achieving rapid, decisive victories. Once the atoll was secured, MAG-22 was ordered to Ngebi, an island in the atoll, which had enough room for airfields critical to follow-on operations in the Marshalls and Marianas. From there, the squadrons executed a variety of missions. VMF-113 covered landings at Ujalang Atoll, and contributed to the neutralizations of Wachi Atoll, Oloalap Atoll, and Mili Atoll. VMF-422 was sent to Roy Namaron on May 27th to conduct interdiction missions against Japanese bases and shipping in the islands. In September, the squadron hosted famed aviator Charles Lindbergh, the first person to fly solo across the Atlantic, who accompanied them on 3 strike missions against Wachi Atoll. Additionally, prior to the arrival of MAG aircraft, the squadron's ground echelon did extensive groundwork to prepare Ngebi Island for operational use. VMFN-533 was responsible for night defense operations over Eniwetok, but did not encounter any enemy aircraft. The MAG's primary test in air-to-air came on March 28th, 367 miles southwest of Eniwetok, over the island of Ponape. A Japanese supply center for the Marshall and Caroline Islands was located on the island, and Army Air Force B-25s of the 48th Bomber Squadron, escorted by Marine fighters, had been executing bombing missions to neutralize it. During this mission, 6 Corsairs of VMF-113 were escorting 4 bombers when the flight came under attack by 12 Japanese fighters. No longer hampered by the poor performance of the Brewster Buffaloes of Midway, the Marines effectively engaged the enemy. With 0 losses suffered, 8 enemy aircraft were shot down and 1 aircraft were destroyed on the ground. Listed are the credits for the air-to-air kills. This blow was so severe to the air capabilities of the Japanese in the area that no enemy air forces were encountered for the remainder of the campaign. After the great success of the Marshall Islands campaign, Allied forces continued the push through the Caroline Islands, Mariana Islands, and Iwo Jima, getting closer and closer to the Japanese mainland. The final step prior to an actual invasion of Japan would be the seizure of the islands in the Ryukyu chain, with the largest and most strategically valuable being Okinawa, only 340 miles from the mainland. This island would provide air bases for B-29 bombers to intensify aerial bombardment of Japan, as well as land-based air support for future ground invasions. The battle, beginning with the invasion occurring April 1st, 1945, would prove to be the largest battle fought in the Pacific Theater, with an estimated 75,000 to 100,000 Japanese troops plus thousands of civilian augmentees defending the island, and a naval force of 15 warships and over 1,000 aircraft. To overcome this force, a massive Allied force was put together with units from the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps. The ground element was the Joint Army-Marine commanded 10th Army, which had its own tactical air force, referred to as the TAF, also under Joint Army-Marine Command. As the battle raged on, the importance of air superiority to victory was becoming more apparent. The Japanese air arm, specifically kamikaze attacks, was considered the biggest threat to the success of the invasion. Therefore, the TAF's top priority was maintenance of air superiority over Okinawa and the 5th Fleet. The increasing frequency and ferocity of kamikaze attacks necessitated more pilots and planes to stop the enemy craft before they could reach their intended targets. Part of these reinforcements was MAG-22. The MAG, itself reinforced with VMF-314 and VMTB-131, was added to the TAF as part of the 2nd Marine Air Wing. Its ground echelon arrived at Aijima in early May, shortly after it was seized by Army forces, and MAG aircraft arrived 2 weeks later and began operations against kamikaze forces. Of note were the Kikutsu raids, 10 large kamikaze attacks carried out by the Imperial Japanese Army, which truly put the threat into perspective. On May 24th and 25th, after Japanese planes had bombed the Aijima airfield and the night full of fighting handled by VMFN 533, a 165-plane kamikaze attack was launched in an attempt to knock out the radar pickets and ships just offshore. VMF-422 scored their first 6 kills during this engagement. Despite shooting down many enemy aircraft, 11 American ships were sunk or damaged. Only 2 days later occurred the longest single alert of the Okinawa campaign, lasting 9 hours and 16 minutes. A total of approximately 150 enemy aircraft attempted to sink more ships. Marine pilots downed 32 aircraft, however 10 ships were damaged with 1 sunk. The last of the raids happened on June 21st and 22nd. Marine night fighters of VMFN 533 downed 6 enemy aircraft. However, the 2 days of fighting also produced the following Navy Cross action of First Lieutenant John Leeper of VMF 314. The most spectacular performance of the day was that of First Lieutenant John W. Leeper of VMF 314, who shot down 2 Bettys, one of which was mothering a Baka bomb. Having finished this chore and nursing a windshield shattered by a 12.7mm bullet, he looked up to find a Zeke driving from above about 10 o'clock. He fired his last 10 rounds of ammunition at the Zeke, which took off after Leeper's wingman, First Lieutenant William Milne, who had just destroyed 2 planes in the melee. Leeper unhesitatingly climbed until he was just under the Zeke and tried to saw off its tail with his propeller. He missed, climbed above the Japanese plane, and on the second try ground his blade into the nose, forward of the cockpit. That did it, but also did Leeper in. His Corsair's right pylon tank exploded, ripping off his right wing. Despite his plane's violent spin, Leeper managed to bail out, but he split his parachute, broke 2 shroud lines, and tore the die marker off his maul west. As if enough had not happened to him, Leeper saw another Zeke about to make a run on him, with 6 Corsairs chasing. Leeper collapsed his precarious parachute by yanking on the left shroud lines. He dropped like a bullet for 3,000 to 4,000 feet, then the chute reopened, and he descended not too swiftly into the water. After an hour and a half, the Cheyenne picked him up. While the fighting squadrons were engaging aircraft over the island, Marine Torpedo Bomber Squadron 131 was engaged in anti-submarine operations. However, under very specific and dire circumstances, they fulfilled a resupply role. In late May, forces of the 1st Marine Division and the Army's 77th Infantry Division assaulted and captured Shuri Castle, a strategic and psychological blow to the Japanese and a milestone for the campaign. However, after protracted fighting and consistent heavy rainfall, the US forces now found themselves in a quagmire. All supply routes had been rendered impassable due to severe flooding, leaving troops critically low on food and ammunition. The mission to resupply fell on the Marines of VTMB 131, led by Major Douglas Bangert, and VTMB 232, both flying the TBM Avenger. Guided in by frontline air liaison parties and radar, the two squadrons made nearly 800 supply drops to frontline forces, with 98% of the packages recovered by the ground troops, despite terrible weather conditions and threat of enemy attack. Hundreds of tons of supplies, including small arms ammunition, grenades, mortar shells, rations, water, telephone wire, and batteries, enabled the ground forces to maintain the momentum of their drive southward. Overall, MAG-22 squadrons flew 22,912 combat hours, fighting in air-to-air duels, protecting against kamikaze attacks, executing approximately 40% of all close air support missions, and contributing to the tally of 637 downed Japanese aircraft. VMF 113 was credited with 12 enemy aircraft down, VMF 314 with 14 aircraft down, VMF 422 with 15 aircraft down, and VMTV 131 with 1 aircraft down. VMFN 533, once again conducting night operations but finally experiencing combat, was responsible for 35 enemy aircraft shot down, the most of any night fighter squadron during the war, and suffered 0 operational losses. 6 of these were by a single pilot, Captain Robert Baird, who was the only Marine night ace of the war. For his service, he received the Navy Cross, Silver Star, and Distinguished Flying Cross. The following is an excerpt from an interview with Robert Baird, sharing a piece of his experience in the night skies over Okinawa.
The other airplanes that I got at night was on 16th of June 1945. I had quite a thrill. I managed to shoot down 2, a Betty and a Nell on that one night. And then again, on the night of 21 June 1945, I got 2 more on that nightcap, a Francis and a Betty at about 23,000 feet. The last kill might be a little might be good for information or interest here. It was made on 14th of July 1945, and we had just made a change in my aircraft. Originally, all the F-6s came out with 450 caliber machine guns and 220 millimeter cannons. However, the airplanes were delivered without the flash hiders for the cannons, and firing a cannon at 20 millimeter at night with no flash hiders would have blinded the pilot immediately. So we removed the 20 millimeters and put in 2 more 50s. So up until this July intercept, I had 650 caliber machine guns, but they got 2 of the flash hiders in for 20 millimeters sometime before that, and we worked hard to get the 20 millimeters installed and in firing condition. And then on the night of 14th of July, I got the opportunity to try out this armament combination. All the guns, the 50s, were loaded with straight armor-piercing incendiaries, and the 20s were loaded with straight high-explosive incendiaries. Well, I intercepted a Betty on this one flight, and one short burst of 20 millimeters, and the whole airplane just caught fire and disintegrated. It was quite spectacular. Previous to that time, we had all found that the Betty bomber was a little bit more difficult to destroy. It just didn't burn as easily as some other Japanese airplanes. So it proved to all of us that this 20 millimeter and 50 caliber combination was sensational and really did the job quickly.
For its service during the battle, MAG-22 received a 2nd Presidential Unit citation, being one of the subordinate units to 2nd Marine Aircraft Wing, which was cited for the award. With Okinawa secured, the Allied forces on Okinawa prepared for an invasion of Kyushu, an island of mainland Japan. However, after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and subsequent surrender of Japan on August 15th, the war was over. In the following month, MAG-22 relocated to Kyushu, uncontested by enemy forces, making landfall on the Japanese homeland. From there, the MAG, with its mission completed, was embarked for the United States by Colonel Elliot Bard, and on December 5, 1945, MAG-22 saw the United States for the very first time. Since Midway 1942, it had exclusively served on Pacific Islands. For its long service outside of the contiguous United States, it earned the popular and fitting name of the Foreign Legion of Marine Aviation.